it may feel as though you did something wrong. If you were ghosted after 2 dates and you're wondering what you did, it may feel as though you did something wrong, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you did. If you went on these 2 dates with this person, there's a chance that they may have not exactly had the certainty of, oh, this is someone that I like. In essence, it may have seemed on the surface as though they were feeling the same way about you on these dates. Maybe they were really smiling, or they had relatively positive body language. Maybe even conversation was good. But it, sometimes appearances on a date are not necessarily what is actually happening. So it can feel confusing because you went on 2 dates with this person and you most likely thought that everything was rosy, everything was great, the date went well. And on the surface, it could have appeared that way, but if they've ghosted you after 2 dates, there are a number of possibilities why they did that, but one of the most common ones is that they may not have necessarily been feeling you the same way you were feeling them on those dates. They may have gone on that second date with you to try to figure out how they really felt. Because sometimes people don't always know on the first date whether they really connected with someone romantically. There may have been traces of a possible connection, but the person may not have necessarily felt confident in that they developed a romantic connection with you on that date. So sometimes they will go on a second date with you just to make sure, just to see if whatever traces of a connection that they somewhat felt during that first date will come out. Or perhaps they didn't even necessarily see any traces of a connection, but their conversation with you was so good, and they did have a good time, that they feel like, okay, let's give it a second date to see if that romantic vibe or romantic connection or synergy can come out between the both of you. So sometimes people will go on that second date just to figure out if they truly connect with you, because that first date went well enough that they feel like it warranted a second date, but at the same time, they may have felt like they want to go on that second date because they're not entirely sure about whether they had a connection with you on the first date as far as romance is concerned. So there's scenarios like that where it feels like, okay, the 2 dates went so well, so why did I get ghosted? What did I do? When in fact, what this person was trying to do was feel you out and see whether that romantic connection is truly there. And so maybe they had positive body language because they were trying to figure that out, and because they were enjoying their time with you on those dates. But at the end of the day, at the end of the second date, they may have just felt that romantic connection, that romantic chemistry was just not there. So yeah, it it feels lousy that they would ghost you. Yes, it's understandable, and naturally you start wondering, what did you do? But this person may have ghosted you because they just felt that was just the easier way to go about it, as opposed to telling you. It can be harder to do that for a lot of people, to just tell you that they had a good time with you, but unfortunately they're not romantically interested. It's difficult for a lot of people to do that, and oftentimes they may worry that if they even try to do that, you may try to convince them otherwise, and then that will put them on the spot, because now they have to go even deeper into detail as to why they no longer want to go out on dates with you or pursue anything romantic with you. So it just puts them in an awkward position. So oftentimes people will take the easy way out, even though it makes you feel lousy. Oftentimes the people take the easy way out and just ghost you in the hopes that you get the point and hopefully you move on. So that's one possibility. Another possibility why you went on 2 dates with this person and now they ghosted you and now you're wondering what you did could be that you may have been dealing with someone who wasn't necessarily open to getting into relationship at this time. Again, going back to what I said earlier about none of this necessarily being your fault, in the sense that you may have totally behaved yourself, you may have totally played your part on the date, showing up on time, dressed properly or appropriately for the occasion, had good conversation, but you may have been dealing with someone who was just not emotionally available to start dating anyone at this time, possibly. They may even still have some emotional ties with an ex or somebody else that they may be talking to at the same time. They may have gone on these 2 dates with you because they made themselves believe that they're ready to move on. They're ready to take their romantic life in a new direction and move on from whoever else has been in their thoughts or has been part of their emotional process as far as love or romantic feelings. They may have told themselves, okay, you know what, I've been in this situation with this other person for months. They they haven't taken our relationship to the next level, or they're not doing what I need them to do, and I'm no longer going to put up with it. So I'm going to start dating around. So to some extent, they tell themselves that they're ready to move on, but really they're not. And oftentimes this happens when people just decide, okay, whatever interaction that they're having with one person, a person that they thought had romantic potential or had relationship potential, isn't working out. They're not getting what they need out of that person. Perhaps the person is not fully committing, or the person is very up and down with their signals and their emotions. One minute they may seem like they're totally into them, the other minute they may seem distant. So this person that you went out on 2 dates with may have had this kind of experience with someone else and decided, you know what, I'm sick and tired of this. I'm going to go ahead and start dating around. So they make themselves think that they're actually ready to start dating around. But oftentimes, once they go out on, say, a date with you or 2 dates with you, it gets to a point where naturally they just start comparing you to that person that they're trying to move on from. So you could be at the date and you could be dressed in a certain way or have a certain posture, and just completely, not forced, almost just automatically, you might make them start thinking about how that other person that they're trying to move on from may have dressed on a date, or how that other person may have had their posture. And so now they start thinking, oh, well, if I was with Peter or if I was with Jane, they'll be dressed in this particular way, or they would be positioning their body in this particular way. And the same thing goes with conversation. Even if it felt like the both of you were having good conversation, this other person may have, again, just automatically, without really realizing it, thought in the back of their mind, oh, well, if I was with Peter, he would have talked about this. If I was with Jane, she would have talked about this. And so just naturally, just without trying to force it, because they still have emotional ties to this other person that you're trying to move on from, they start comparing you to that person as the date wears on. And oftentimes, being that you're just getting to know this person, you've just been on a couple dates, maybe you've had a few conversations, but you haven't built any real history with this person yet. This person is most likely going to put more weight on the experiences that they've had with the person that you're trying to move on from than they would put on the experience that they're having with you, as far as, oh, well, Peter had better conversation, or oh, but Peter had better posture, oh, but Peter dressed better, oh, but Peter this, Peter that. And the same thing with Jane. They'll think in the same way, oh, but Jane had better conversation, oh, but Jane was more fun. So they can do that because they've built a history with Peter and Jane, or Jane. They built a history with Peter or Jane. And so you unfortunately end up being, it's not fair. It's not a fair fight because you haven't had enough time to build that kind of relationship with this person in question that you went on 2 dates with. Whereas this person has a history with whoever it is that you're trying to move on from. So naturally, that person that you're trying to move on from is always going to be, to some extent, ahead of you when this person in question starts comparing the both of you. So that may have been what happened during these 2 dates. And perhaps it happened on that first date and the person just felt like, yeah, I know I thought about Peter while I was on the date with you, but you know what? I'm going to go on a second date and hopefully I don't think about Peter. I don't compare Peter with you in any way. Or Jane, right? Oh, I know I thought about Jane during the date, but you know what? I'm going to go on a second date because I want to stop thinking about Jane. I already said I'm moving on and I'm going to start dating again. And so that's exactly what I'm going to do. So they forced themselves to go on this second date. They agreed to a second date with you. They forced themselves to go on that second date, still in this fantasy land that they can move on from whoever it is that you're trying to move on from. So they go on the second date with you. And yes, on the surface, everything seems like it went well. This person enjoyed your company. Seemingly, the both of you had good conversation, maybe even positive body language, perhaps even slightly more romantic than the first date was. And so the second date ends and you're thinking, oh, that was a good second date. And you're looking forward to the third date. But then that third date doesn't happen. This person ghosts you. And now you're wondering what you did. A lot of times, in the scenario that I've just described, after that second date, this person came to the point where they realized that I can't go on a third date. Because if I go on a third date, it's just going to make me think more about Peter or Jane while I'm at that date. And I'm trying to get Peter or Jane out of my mind. I'm trying to move on from them. But if I go on this third date with you, I'm just going to start comparing you with them automatically without even trying to. It's just going to come to the forefront because there's certain things you're going to say or do that's just going to make me think about, oh, what would Peter or Jane have said? Or what would Peter or Jane have done? And so if I go on this third date with you, what I'm trying, it will essentially put me in a position where I'm remembering Peter or Jane, who I'm trying to forget and move on from, because you're there with me and I can't help but compare you to Peter or Jane. So as a result, they decide, okay, well, I'm not going to go on this third date. A third date is not going to happen because I'm trying to move on from Peter or Jane. And all that's happening when I go on these dates with you is remember them. Now, again, this has nothing to do with you. This has nothing to do with you. The natural inclination when you get ghosted is just thinking, well, what did I do? Well, these scenarios I've just described have nothing to do with anything you did on that date. So don't always automatically go to, oh, I did something wrong, especially if you had good dating etiquette. Again, you showed up on time, you had good conversation, you were respectful, you did all the things you were supposed to do on on your dates. Oftentimes, the issue may be coming from the other person. And like I described earlier, it's easier for this person to ghost you as opposed to, oh, let's keep talking, because they know, okay, well, if we keep talking, this person's going to want to go out on a third date, and I know I don't want to go out on a third date, but every time I talk to them, they're going to want to, so I should just cut them off. Unfortunately, sorry, but I should cut them off. So this could have been the thought process of this other person.